Hey everyone, Anark here. This is going to be the first in a series of videos I do where I just choose some smaller topic and talk to the camera. The reason why I'm doing these kinds of videos is for two reasons. One, my longer videos are just getting longer and longer and longer, and also more in depth. So I'm researching more, I am taking longer editing the scripts. They're becoming more and more sophisticated theoretical works. So this one is the longest that any production cycle has taken on a video, and pretty much every video has been longer in the production cycle than the last. I don't really expect that to change in the future. So I need to find some way that the channel can be updated from time to time, that I can, comment and make content without people having to wait, like 6 or 7 months for me to create new content. Several people have given me their recommendations on what to do about this. And, they're generally good recommendations, like, start streaming or create shorter video essays or split your bigger videos up into, a lot of smaller ones. Here's the thing. There's reasons why I haven't done each of those. So I haven't started streaming because I kind of feel like there's a lot of perverse incentives involved in it, even though in general it's like very lucrative. You get lots of watch time out of it. People really like tune in and they're much more excited. They get to ask you questions and interact and all of that. However, you can really get stuck into this cycle where you're just doing streams over and over and over. So I really don't want to do that. I want those to just kind of be something that happens every once in a while. The second recommendation that I make shorter video essays. Well, the thing is like these video essays, I can't really like make more video essays of any kind without the longer video essays taking even longer to make. I mean, like the labor I would be using to make the longer video essay just has to get split up so that I can make the shorter ones. So it doesn't really solve this problem. It just means the channel would become more focused on the smaller video essays, which is not really what I want to do. And thirdly, splitting the big essays I do up into smaller ones. I already kind of do that. Which is to say, like this series is in parts and the state is counter-revolutionary is in parts. When I know a project is going to be really big, I do split it up into pieces. However, I split it up into pieces such that they will be well-contained chunks nonetheless. I don't want there to be like abrupt breaks in the works. I want them to just be cohesive, coherent pieces. And I want the pieces that could stand on their own to stand on their own. So that is also not an option. What I realized is I could do these short segments like I plan on doing here, and which I will be doing hopefully a little more regularly, where I just talk to the camera about some kind of topic. I just kind of, freely speak about my thoughts on it. So if this sounds like a direction you like, or if you just want to support me on the channel, please go become a patron. The Patreon supporters really are providing me a substantial chunk of income, but it's not enough income that I can do this full time. So if you want to see me produce more content and you want to see my content come out faster, the best way you can do that is becoming a patron, because I have to work like second jobs and like pick up gigs and stuff like that in order to pay my bills. So anyway, I'm just going to get into the first topic that I chose, and it's partially because, it's something that's just like come up on Twitter for the 1000th time. And that is the concept of leftist unity. I'll just say right off the bat, and anybody who watches my channel should be pretty familiar with this, I am against left unity. And there are a variety of reasons for that. I'm not just against left unity, for some abstract puritanical reasons. I'm willing to compromise with people who don't hold my exact values, but whom, we could get along, we could act effectively together. I think the problem is that is simply not the case with authoritarian leftists. I think that the real vector for unity, the place where we should be trying to cooperate and act together, is really just like the anarchist and libertarian socialist milieu. Basically, all those different kinds of anarchists that exist and all the different forms of libertarian socialism that exist. I think that all of those can be allies to each other because they all seek a horizontal power structure and not a hierarchical power structure. I don't think that horizontal power structures and hierarchical power structures can actually work together. I think that they work at perfect odds to one another. So this really gets into the problem. The anarchist believes in means-ends unity. Those of you who watched part 1 of A Modern Anarchism probably saw me talk about that. This is to say, the anarchist believes that one cannot disentangle the means from the ends. The means that are chosen determine the possible achievable ends, and the ends you want to achieve can only be achieved by particular means. Furthermore, you have to know what means you have available in order to figure out what ends you might have available. There are a variety of implications to this. One of them is that using hierarchical means will not lead you to a horizontal society. It can't lead you to a liberatory society because it is precisely the mechanism which prevents the creation of a liberatory society. It is precisely the reason we do not have a society where we are emancipated beings. It is precisely the reason that we are at odds with the ecology, why man or humanity is separated from nature. So insofar as we continue using hierarchical means, all we will achieve is hierarchical ends. So what this means is, in the movement, when authoritarian leftists and anarchists or libertarian socialists work together, what we find is that they are constantly clashing with one another. This is not a coincidence. Some people try to make this out like it's sectarianism or something. This is because the two are literally using different approaches. And these approaches are perfectly at odds. Let's really think about it. What's going on here? The anarchist is seeking all of those methods which empower the people. They are trying to create horizontal power structures in the here and now, and they want those power structures to prefigure the future, not to just give an example for the future, but to actually transition into being the power structures of the future, right? So we are building the future world within the world we currently have. That means that it's required that we build a structure which prefigures that coming structure. Now, by contrast, hierarchical thinking is based around often, or usually, co-opting or trying to control existing hierarchical power structures, or alternatively, making a new hierarchical power structure which will hopefully be able to replace it. What we actually find is that in a much more general sense, the hierarchical power structure that is used to replace the old one just ends up being pretty well a perfect copy of the old one. It ends up falling into all the same ruts that the previous hierarchical system had developed. So in practice, what does this mean? It means that the three methods of authoritarian leftists are co-option, electoralism, and sometimes a sort of armed guerrilla coup. So they kind of mix and match these three methods in all of our examples. We don't have any examples where they used purely one or the other that I can think of, at least. Yeah, no, they pretty much always use some mixture of these three. In the situation where they can't do electoralism, or they can't succeed doing electoralism, that means they're going to resort to co-option or guerrilla coup. Here in the US, it should be said, that's the latter two, electoralism, they're failing miserably at. And the third one, they seem to be almost like anti-militant in a really significant way. In fact, one of the things they criticize anarchists for all the time is that they're adventurist, that they're too violent. They're just out there causing problems and setting trash cans on fire, almost like they're spreading conservative rhetoric. And so what you should expect, especially in the US, and I got to say in a lot of other Western countries and abroad, if they are failing at those latter two, they're going to try to co-opt your movement. Their whole method is to try to find some organic movement that they did not create, that they had very little, if any, part in, and then to jump in the driver's seat at the last second. And afterwards, they will claim they created the movement. One of our best examples of this is the Bolsheviks. The Bolsheviks had almost nothing to do with the construction of dual power that took place before the February and October Revolution. The meaning of the word Bolshevik, as I understand, is minority. They were the minority party. They literally named themselves as the minority party. They were not really popular until right before the October Revolution. A lot of people are surprised to learn this. This goes against what they're told, and that's because it's Bolshevik propaganda. This is what they do. They essentially usually have very little to do with the original movement, and they simply appropriate it afterwards. So what does that mean? Well, what that means is that the authoritarian leftists love peddling left unity lines. They love using this splitter rhetoric because what they're looking for is for everybody to fall in line behind them. What does leftist unity really mean? It means, shut up and stop criticizing us anarchists, right? That's what it really means. It's an authoritarian ploy to get people to stop criticizing them. And we have plenty of history of examples of what happens when this takes place. So when we look at, once again, the Russian Revolution, what we can see is that anarchists and libertarian socialists actually cooperated pretty prolifically. Maybe one of the best examples of cooperation, of left unity that we've seen. The result was that the Bolsheviks suppressed the anarchists and libertarian socialists afterwards. They threw them in labor camps. They kidnapped them with the Cheka and so on. They destroyed their labor unions. They banned their parties. They simply disallowed any of this continuing criticism from going on. So left unity is a temporary ploy by authoritarians. It's a way to get you to march behind them when they have no intention of actually cooperating with you afterwards. What they really want, the only way they would cooperate with you afterwards is if you said nothing, never criticized, and never rebelled against what they created. But that leads us to the next problem. What they create is basically just capitalism. The only difference is, hands of the means of production have switched from, a private owners, a very, very small group of private owners, to a very small group of state owners. The workers are still alienated from the means of production. Wage labor continues. Commodity production continues. Basically almost nothing changes. The best you might get out of it is like social democracy with state capital characteristics. And over time, you'll find it devolves more and more into traditional capitalism. And this is because that's its, basic function. That is due to its similarity, the similarities that it holds with all hierarchical power structures. It is simply, once again, falling into the ruts that were already developed by the previous system. So, if anarchists and libertarian socialists are able to learn from history and to think strategically and not just thinking of this as a social club where you make friends, you can't really form coalitions with authoritarian left organizations. Now, as for your friends and who you go out and have a drink with, that's up to you. Whatever. I don't care who you befriend necessarily. But insofar as who you form organizations with, who your organizations accept, who your confederations allow into them, You absolutely should not be letting authoritarian leftists into any of these organizational spaces. Not because they are personally bad people. It just has nothing to do with them. The method itself is contradictory to the ends we are attempting to achieve. So if they carry out their method faithfully, then they are carrying out, means which are contradictory to ours, to the broader movement at hand. So that's the problem here. This is the reason why leftist unity is incoherent. It's ineffective. The two constituencies are never going to get along, or rather, organizationally, politically, they're never going to get along. And interpersonally, it's irrelevant. Do what you like, but stop confusing the statement that authoritarian leftism is a counter-revolutionary ideology, which it is. I literally did a 4-part series laying out why, and you can almost see like every video I've ever developed as being a description of why. Don't confuse that with a statement that the individuals are bad people. Like, that's just completely missing the mark. It just has nothing to do with those individuals. So this is basically my perspective on leftist unity. It is incoherent, impractical, and does not in fact lead to success. I suppose maybe one last perspective, one last argument that I've heard regularly that people often bring up in this discussion is that the left is such a marginal movement. It's such a fringe movement. Surely we shouldn't be cutting our numbers by splitting the fringe into even smaller groups. Well, not even withstanding the previous discussion or the previous statements that I've just made about why this is wrong, I just want to note that we are not trying to build the left. Right? That's not what this is about. The left includes all kinds of different ideologies we would never want to see rise to power, including those I just mentioned, authoritarian leftism writ large, which, Marxist-Leninism, Marxist-Leninist Maoism, Stalinism, Dengism, and so on. The actual goal is to build up a constituency, build up the support for an actually revolutionary ideology. I'm not trying to build support for the left. I'm trying to build support for anarchism. I'm trying to build support for libertarian socialism. So it's irrelevant whether it's split into smaller coalition. It was never a coalition to begin with, and it's not that coalition we should be trying to make successful. Lastly, let me address another argument that I've heard, which is, Daniel, if you think authoritarian leftism is so impractical in these societies, you think it's so obscure and it has so little traction, why do you spend so much time talking about it? What's the purpose of orienting yourself around this discussion so much? If they're irrelevant, then don't worry about them. Don't talk about them. The problem is that in those 3 methods that I just listed, the one that they really have available to them under those circumstances is co-option, which means they don't need a lot of people. If they're just going to jump into the driver's seat at the last second, they don't need a mass movement. Somebody else can make the mass movement. The people can make a mass movement, and then they will just co-opt it at the very last second. Every time that we let authoritarian leftists into positions of rhetorical power or power to produce propaganda, them entering spaces without pushback, every time we choose that to make this a social club and not maximize political outcomes, we allow them to later go on to co-opt things. So these are the reasons why I spend some time pushing back against authoritarian leftism, that I do not just let it rest. I see it as a real threat if indeed we were to actually build anything sufficient in the future, if we were to really build a movement whatever number of them that were allowed into these spaces and were allowed platforms without pushback would almost certainly become the vectors for co-option. Once again, not because anything personal about them. I don't think it's really, it's not about them. It's about what the ideology demands, about what it necessitates. So anyway, I think I will just stop it there, especially in the spirit of actually keeping these short. I'm going to not be as long-winded as I generally would. If you are interested in me answering any particular kind of shorter form questions like I've done here in future iterations of this series, then please comment below. And if you want to support the channel, once again, let me just mention, becoming a patron on my Patreon is an enormous help. Don't forget to like, subscribe, etc. All the things YouTuber says, you get the idea. Anyway, I'll talk to you all soon. Have a good one.